There we go. All right, so we are getting started. Again, welcome to this virtual book launch for Jen Soriano's Nervous, Essays on Heritage and Healing. And we are joined today by Jen Soriano, she, they, who is a writer and movement builder who has long worked at the intersection of grassroots organizing, narrative strategy, and art-driven social change. Jen is also an independent scholar and performer and co-editor of Closer to Liberation and a Pina XY, I don't know how to pronounce that, Activist Anthology. Originally from a landlocked part of the Chicago area, Jen now lives with her family in Seattle, near the Duwamish River and the Salish Sea. Nervous is her debut full-length essay collection. Welcome, Jen. And in conversation with her today is Grace Talusan, who is the author of The Body Papers and teaches in the nonfiction writing program at Brown University. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them in just a minute. But I did want to also, Jen asked us if we could describe ourselves for those of us who have low vision or other needs. And so I am a Filipina woman with a bobbed haircut, and you can't really see very much. I'll stand up a little bit. I'm wearing a sleeveless dress with batteries on it because I thought that was a good fit for Jen's book. And in the background, I have a landscape painting and some plants against a white bookshelf and a brown wall. And I will turn it over to Jen and Grace.
Thank you. Congratulations, Jen. You wanted to start out with a reading, is that right?
Sure, yes. And I'll also start out just by thanking everybody for being here. It's a very emotional day for people who don't know about pub days. And just the range of people that's on this call is making me very emotional, from my family to my chosen family to my editor Francesca to writer friends who are like family. Just thank you for being here. I'm going to start out actually with a quick visual description, and then I will do a reading. But I just wanted to say another thank you also to Joanna at Bel Canto for hosting this and for running such an amazing community center that is also a bookshop, and also to Grace, who I will say more about this later, but who has inspired me probably more than she knows, and Nervous as a direct result of her book, The Body Papers, being such an inspiration to me. All right, so I am a light-skinned Filipinx person with asymmetrical black hair, shoulder length on one side and short on the other, and have purple lipstick, which I put on when I'm feeling nervous. It's kind of my like amulet lipstick. And I have a colorful green shirt on that my sister-in-law Laura gave to me, who may be listening right now, dangling earrings, and in the background is political art that my partner made, and a white and brown wall. Okay, so I'm just going to read a bit from Nervous, and then we'll get to be in discussion with Grace. All right, I'm going to read from the introduction. And if I have time, I'll read a little bit from another section. We are nervous beings in nervous nations at an increasingly nervous time. I wrote this book for those of us who have felt crazy and alone, for those of us who have been told to forget about the past, to stop being weak, and to swallow our pain, for all of us with a knowing body, for babaylan who remember a time before silence, for pearls in their shells, seeking conditions to shine. My story is just one ripple in an emerging ecosystem of interdependence where we don't have to bear generational pain alone. This is a story I'm not supposed to tell. I'm supposed to continue a lineage of silence, be wordless in pain, resilient and productive, a walking American dream. But my body speaks in a language of grief and suffering, and with words of longing, liberation, and love. I have always been a nervous person. I startle at the sound of my name. I enter rooms searching for exits. I worry about being invisible while constantly afraid of being seen. Perhaps because I have been so nervous, I am also a person in pain. My hands smolder and my wrists feel riddled with broken glass. On any given day, my nerves are either drowned or lit on fire. Nerves might make you think of fainting rooms, smelling salts, and frail maidens fanning pale faces. Nerves make me think of machetes and murder, survival and silence, the sibilance of stories untold. For a long time, I didn't talk about my pain because I wanted to hide it, like you might hide soiled panties or some other mortifying mistake. It wasn't until I read Audre Lorde's The Cancer Journals that it occurred to me that I didn't have to be so silent and afraid. I started writing nervous after being diagnosed with central sensitivity syndrome, an umbrella term for various conditions affecting the nervous system, including fibromyalgia, irritable bowel syndrome, and chronic pain from central sensitization. I was a new parent learning to raise my first and only child while also embarking on a journey to understand the pain I'd carried for most of my life. Years before this, I was also diagnosed with peripheral neuralgia, dystonia, mild scoliosis, generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, and complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD. I had found these diagnoses affirming, but I didn't yet know what lay at the root. What traumas had disrupted my nervous system to yield such pain and to give rise to these comorbid conditions? And how could I keep my child from a similar fate? This collection traces my journey of asking questions and finding answers, breaking silence and becoming seen. Though pain and trauma are highly individualized experiences, and by definition can make us feel cut off from the rest of the world, they are the reality for the majority of us. 7 out of 10 of us go through at least one traumatic event in our lifetimes. About 1 in 10 of us will go on to develop PTSD or CPTSD. Some professionals consider post-traumatic impacts to be a profound public health problem, with as many as 1 in 5 people worldwide and 12 million people in the US alone experiencing PTSD in any given year. The fact that psychological trauma is so widespread makes it a collective rather than a solely individual experience. Similar to how the COVID-19 pandemic affected the entire globe, trauma affects a multitude of bodies and the body politic at large. This collective experience is not just about suffering. Grief and pain may be carried in our nerves, but so are chronic joy, laughter, and the ancestral wisdom that comes from our somatic impulse to survive. I'm going to read one more excerpt. It's from the very last essay in the book. So you get a little bit of the beginning and a little bit of the very end, but without any spoilers. The last essay is called Watershed, and it starts with an epigraph from Pina poet Arlene Biala. This conversation is about us, the mostly water, how we will surge, recede, and rise. It is exactly 30 years since my first trip back to the Philippines, and Juan and I are preparing to bring little T, who is 5 years old, to the islands for the first time. I feel excited but nervous. Little T feels the same. He is over the moon about flying, but worries the plane will run out of fuel. He is excited to meet his relatives in the homeland, but is sad about leaving his stuffed animal family alone for weeks. He looks forward to the beach, but is nervous about getting lost. To calm our jitters, I take him to West Seattle to sit by the sound. At Alki Point, the water ripples until a white-crested wave lifts our shoes in the wake of a passing barge. Did you know this water is part of the same larger body of water that reaches all the way to where we're going in the Philippines? I say. I know. You've told me that 1,000 times, he replies, rolling his eyes. Okay, fine, but can you actually imagine it or feel it more when we're close to it? I ask. Not really, he says. Close your eyes and listen, I suggest. He closes his eyes, fidgets, and opens them a few seconds later. What do you think? I ask him. I don't know. I'm still nervous, he says, and I'm hungry. Yeah, well, me too. That's because you're always hungry, he says. That's true, I reply. We leave the beach to go find food. What I now wish I'd said to little T instead. It makes sense to be nervous. It's a sign that we are open to the imperfections of the world. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'll do a brief visual description of myself. Similar to Jen, I'm also a lighter skinned Filipinx person. I have shoulder length black hair, and I'm wearing a polka dot blue sleeveless dress. And I have a terracotta painted background behind me. So Jen, there's so much to say about your book, but first, congratulations. I mean, it's a very special day. This is the day. This is launch day. It's like I feel so honored that that we're having this conversation together and with all these people who are in your community, your fans, people who admire you. I mean, your friends, just all we're all here, surrounding your book and sending it off into the world in this way. And I just really feel really honored to be a part of that. Um, I wanted to ask, you're welcome. I want to ask a bunch of questions, but this book is unlike any other book that I've read. I really admire what you're doing with what you've done with telling your story your way. I mean, I understand that there's this many books and memoirs and essay collections out there that may be about people's healing journeys and pain and things like that. But the way that you've approached this material with science writing and the archives and history and histories that people probably don't know about, including, especially with Filipino histories. I just really admire the choices you've made, how you put it together, the experience of reading it is really special and different. And to me, that's what's so exciting about reading is to be drawn in by a voice and a vision that is unlike any other. That excites me a lot. And so I just want to say congratulations on what you've accomplished with
Thank
this.
you so
You
much.
said, you're welcome. You said that your book is in conversation with mine, and that's the best compliment anyone could ever give me, really. It really is. And so I thank you for that.
You
so
were a
for people who,
trailblazer.
yeah,
You were.
for people who don't know the book, um, or who haven't had the privilege of reading it yet, because it's today's the launch day, could you say a little bit about the origin story of it? I know you read a little bit about how you started it, but when did you realize, like, I am writing a book about this particular part of my life?
Well, okay. I'm going to say something that I haven't said before, I think, in answer to this question, because I think that there are a lot of writers on this call. And so there'll be some writers who I think will identify with this. So before I knew I was going to write this book, I kind of always knew I wanted to write a book. Like, there's some YA authors on this call, such as my original editor, Jennifer Baker, whose YA novel just came out. And young adult novels were the things that first made me want to write a book. Because when I read those, I was like, these are opening worlds to me that I did not have access to. I come from the pre-internet days of growing up, right? And so I was like, I want to be able to write a book. Like, books are amazing, they're magical, right? And then I grew up and became an adult and did a lot of other things, but things that were related, right? Always about storytelling and storytelling for communities. And then my son, I had my first and only child, my son, about 9 years ago. And that was a very big deal for me, as I write about in the book. It was such a major life transition, and what I had to do even to prepare to get to that point was such a transformative process that I also took that opportunity to tell myself, I'm going to do what I had wanted to do when I was a kid, which is I wanted to write. I wanted to write a book. And when I started writing, to be honest, it wasn't like, okay, now I'm writing my book, right? It was just like, I want to start doing creative writing. That coincided with a lot of time taking care of my new child, where I was frankly again in another place where I was like in a lot of pain, that in a way that I hadn't been for a while, and lying awake at night for a while, for hours on end, generated a lot of writing actually about being in pain and about trying to understand it. And so then over the years, including going through an MFA program, all those things, the longing and then the wanting to make sense of the pain, longing to write, wanting to make sense of the pain, and then remembering things that I had read as an adult that influenced me, things like Audre Lorde's cancer journals and Aurora Levins Morales's medicine stories. I started to think, oh, maybe I could write something that is like the cancer journals, that is like medicine stories about my pain, where it can put it into a political context, historical context, and perhaps bring more understanding, not just to myself, but others who will read it.
I think, taking on pain as the central topic, I think is an incredible thing to do. It's such a difficult thing to write about. There's so many challenges with writing about it, and even not just writing about it, but even trying to convey pain. And you recount some of those moments and trying to tell the story of your pain to care providers and other people, and just the challenges there. Could you talk a little bit about some of what you noticed about writing about the story of your pain and how that's sort of the same or different in terms of trying to convey it, say, doctors and other folks?
Mm. I think writing about it is similarly hard as trying to convey it to doctors. I think expressing something invisible and personal and often intense as pain can be extremely hard. But I think that's also why it sort of demands an expression of some sort, right? And there's a quote that I write in the book about how a neuroscientist wrote about how the purpose of pain is to draw attention to itself so it can be remedied. And I think my pain was definitely doing that. It was definitely drawing a lot of attention to itself. And I won't say that writing healed my pain, but I will say that writing was definitely part of the process of paying attention, right? Paying attention to the pain in a way that then helped me piece together the fragmented medical diagnoses and different pieces of information that I got from different types of practitioners, which was extremely hard fought and very frustrating. And it was in the weaving together, the stitching together, and the piecing together of a larger narrative that made sense to me, where some of the healing came.
That's incredible. I mean, one of the essays, I think it's called Neuroplasticity, maybe some of the topic is about that. But one thing that struck me in that essay was, we can make these changes over time, but then also there can be like a flash of something, and then there can be a big change. And so, it's interesting to hear you talk about this process of writing the work itself as being a factor in impacting your relationship to your pain. It's this other creative process. Like maybe people write, there's a lot of writers on this call today, but maybe there are other creative practices that people can do too to, address some of their pain. But I can see, the authority and the agency that it takes to write this story, and to bring all those pieces together. I don't know. I know, knowing from doing it myself, I can, and then externalizing it into an object, into a book. It is really a transformative experience.
And
I'm
I
going to
think,
go. Yeah, go ahead.
so I was just going to add that I think it, without necessarily realizing it until maybe now when I'm reflecting back because of your question, it's a process that that actually runs counter to what trauma does to the body and to our memory, right? Trauma fragments, trauma dissociates, trauma disintegrates neural circuits. And so I think I was sort of instinctively trying to like reintegrate and reconnect and reassociate, make new associations as part of that process of trauma healing. And then perhaps not coincidentally, that is also what colonization does, right? Colonization disconnects and it disassociates and it disintegrates. And so, yeah, I mean, oh, wow, your question just made me realize that I think I really also was just following this gut process of like, hey, I want to undo some of these impacts that I feel in my body that I trace in the book back to a history, a long, long history of colonization, which is a system of mass trauma.
Yes, I mean, the stories that you tell about intergenerational trauma, I mean, it's writing a history of that many people don't know about in terms of the Philippine-US relations and the war histories and things like that. But you're also very actively making this connection between generations, which I think is really beautiful and powerful, through story. Let's go back to this. You said the word fragmented narratives and fractured narratives. There's some of the essays play with that very visually. I'm thinking of 381 years and the way that this looks on the page, looks like kind of a dialectic, a dialogue back and forth. And then the fragmenting is a little more subtle in some of the other essays. There's sections with headings and things like that. Please say a little bit more about whether it was a conscious decision or not, but to talk about this idea of fracturing the narrative or fragmenting it.
Ooh, one of my favorite questions. I actually just taught a whole class on writing in fragments. So I love fragments. Even though, obviously there's, like I had just said, there's also a longing for putting together the fragments, but writing in fragments doesn't mean that things stay fragmented, actually, right? It's actually just a unit that then gets associated and connected with other things into a fragmented whole, which is what I think of as my body. It's a fragmented whole. It's a combination of an intuitive process because it is just how I think. I think in fragments. It can be a neurodivergent way of thinking. It also is the way that I layer personal experience with science and with history. Some of that obviously takes a lot of effort and craft, but also just my running dialogue in my head is always kind of a bunch of fragments of all of those things. So it's the way that I think. And then when telling a personal story, I have a lot of trouble telling stories, actually, when telling any stories, but especially personal stories that involve my memory. I have a lot of trouble telling stories in a traditional narrative arc, right? Beginning, middle, end. I can't, it's very challenging for me. And so, I basically my agent was like, so don't, turn your traditional memoir manuscript into essays. And the essay form really helped me be able to free up that intuitive process of writing in a fragmented way. There's also cases where I do it very deliberately, and 381 years. Thank you for showing that essay. It's one of my favorites personally of the whole collection. And I really got to shout out Jennifer Baker, my first editor, for really encouraging me to do that, because I don't think all editors would. I think they might think it's too experimental, wouldn't sell, people wouldn't get it. But for me, it was a really deliberate craft choice, because I couldn't find another way to be able to tell this call and response contrapuntal history of colonization and resistance. And rather than try to just tell some, first the Spaniards came and they did this, first the Japanese, then the Japanese came, then the Americans came, and then where's the Filipinos story and all of that, right? Like in some just kind of long, supposedly linear history, I broke it all up into fragments and arranged it, as you had said, as this sort of dialogue on the page. And I'm happy to say that so far people have already been pretty responsive to it.
Yeah, I mean, you said the word, the phrase traditional narrative, and, like whose tradition? Like there's so many, right? Like, so I think that you had a really great team and editors and, people who got it, who understood what your book is and encouraged you to go in this direction, which is why I think it's so successful. I mean, it's because you're following the way that you want to tell the story, and you're following your intuition, and there is no other way to tell 381 years, right? Like this is the way to do it in these pieces, and then the ways that it's arranged around people can read it on their own, but like around I'm gonna make the sign of the cross, like the crown, throat, the parts of the body. I mean, it's just working on so many levels. It's really exciting to read. And I am never lost in this book. We use terms like fragmented and fractured, and it does move in time, and in sorts of writing, like there's science writing, and then there's writing about archives and things like that. Like I am never lost in this narrative. I'm with you and your vision all the way.
That is so good to hear. Yeah, that's really good to hear, because I definitely got feedback early on, before I found my agent and my editor, that it was going to be too much, that people were not going to be able to process it. So I'm glad that at least with you, that is not true.
Yes. And I mean, and you have great models, like you mentioned the cancer journals, something that I had read when I was having, when I was deciding whether to have a mastectomy or not. And then afterwards, I was reading the cancer journals, and it was really a companion to me. And it isn't like any other book either. What she's writing about, how she's writing about, the fact that she's writing about things that we're not supposed to talk about and things that are supposed to be invisible, like the fact that someone's had a mastectomy. So I don't know. I think you're writing in that same tradition, and it is really powerful. You also have extensive notes in the back, your references. It made me think of, and you have epigraphs and you have quotations. It really feels like a book that is aware of community, and like it's not just shouting out, but it feels like the cover of the book, which is we're connected, like our ideas, the conversations we're having, everyone's really connected. And so I think about this idea of like citation as a form of respect and a form of love. And can you talk about this, how your book is cites a lot. It refers to other people's ideas. Can you talk about that, Joyce?
Oh, Grace. Thank you so much for pointing that out. It actually is one of my favorite parts about the book, is the bibliography, the end notes. It's something that I worked really hard on. And it was because I wanted to do what you said, which is acknowledge, the community of people who we may not all know each other, but we are actually in this kind of conversation with each other. And I just got so excited when I was doing research. I just got so excited about all of the amazing work on, historical trauma, for example, from Indigenous scholars, all of the work on Filipino American psychology, right, from people like Kevin Nadal and E.J.R. David, and from the decolonization perspective, Lenny Strobel, and I wanted, a piece of their body of work to be in here, and in a practical sense, I'm really hoping that students get to read this book, and that this will be a guide to them for further reading, and not just students, anybody. But then in particular in school settings, I think, the significance of what I was hoping to create as a radical bibliography will hopefully really not be lost on people. And so that I hope it can be, a really practical tool for scholars, students, and other people who just want to learn more. And my acknowledgement section is also very long, speaking of community.
Well, I very much appreciate the shout out and your acknowledgements. And, again, that's like to see you had thanked Maxine Hong Kingston, The Woman Warrior, and next to her book is my book. And I mean, that her book is so important to me, and just to see my book next to her book and your acknowledgements, it really meant a lot to me. So thank you. I can see that your notes being like a kind of course, like as I look through them, like you call it a radical bibliography, and I'm in like syllabus writing mode, and so I think about your notes section as its own kind of syllabus and its own kind of course that people could take together and read together and read these references, and see all the different ways that people have been thinking and talking about these ideas. It is really, your book is really different from other memoirs in that way, or sorry, not, books of essays and things like that, in having this kind of extensive bibliography. What is something in your research process that stayed with you or surprised you?
Oh gosh, it's hard to pick just one thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm just such a nerd at heart that I just got so much delight from so many of the pieces of research that I encountered. But I'll share, I guess I'll pick this one particular piece of research that's it's about worms. Bear with me. It's actually a pretty groundbreaking piece of research in the scientific world. But what I like about it is that it can actually be extrapolated to the human world. And the scientist, Colleen Murphy, who's at Princeton, she's a geneticist. She, unlike some other scientists, I think partly because she's a woman, probably, she doesn't really have any squeamishness about saying that, sure, my science on worms could actually have implications for humans. So this is what it is. I'll just try to make it be really brief. So she found out that there is a way that these worms transfer memory and learning across up to 5 generations of worms. And it's specifically memory and learning in response to threat. So they learn, so say, great grandpa or grandma learns that this one type of bacteria that they usually eat actually turned bad, and it's bad for you, very bad for you. And so they learn to avoid it. And the next 4 generations also learn to avoid it without ever once touching it. But then by the 5th generation, great granddaughter or whatever, starts to learn that actually that was back then, but now this bacteria is no longer toxic to us, so we can eat it again. And so what she learned is that this direct transmission, and it is through, they're worms. They're, as far as we know, they're not telling stories to each other, right? It's really through the germline. And it's in response to their environments, right? But that by the 5th generation, because that threat was no longer there, that response was reversed. And for me, that was a beautiful piece of research because it shows that in creatures like that, they pass on ancestral learnings and memory, but they can also transform those lessons when they're no longer applicable. And so for us, that means that traumatic learning and lessons that helped our ancestors survive can be relearned and rewired out of our systems if we don't need them anymore.
Yeah, that's amazing. Really, I mean, I'm just sorry, I'm just still thinking about that because you're right. The transmission is not the way that we tell stories, but it's very much in the body. There's some, um, you know, storytelling going on there that outside, that's like outside of language, but it's
Mhm.
passing this knowledge on. Um, yeah, that's incredible. Um, what are some of the hopes that you have in this book being out in the world? Because of course, we can write, and there's good things that happen just from engaging in the practice of writing. And we're celebrating you on your publication day, and this is different because this is writing that's going out to as many readers as possible. But what are some of your hopes for your book and this book of essays being in the world?
Thanks for that question. I hope that it reaches people who feel like they're alone. Honestly, I hope it makes folks feel like they're less alone. I needed books to tell me that. So for anybody, for whatever reason, whether it's because they have a chronic illness or they have chronic pain, or they haven't quite found their people in whatever way, that somehow this book will help them feel that they're not alone. I also hope that it inspires other people to tell more stories. And that's something that you had said when you went on tour for the body papers. And so I will quote you and say, I hope that my book does the same, because your book definitely did that for me. And I do hope that it can play a role in sparking conversation about trauma, to be able to destigmatize the impacts of it, destigmatize mental health care, the need for mental health care. And I also hope that eventually, honestly, that I can work with people on a policy level to use this tool to be able to advance more investment. Mental health care from the cradle to the grave is what I've been saying. We are in a crisis around mental health care, and that's not going to change anytime soon with the amount of investment that we have in it now. And we need more than ever. So that's one of my greatest hopes, as well as more investment in early childhood development and reproductive justice and care for birthing people.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I think, did you want to say, like, so people buy their books through Bel Canto Books? Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I completely forgot to say that in the beginning.
Okay.
But there's more people on now, so
Yeah.
hopefully we haven't lost anybody. But I was gonna announce that any books that are bought through Bel Canto tonight, in addition to all of the pre-orders, for every book bought, I'm going to personally donate to Maui Recovery. And they're specific. I'm actually going to put the name of the organization in the chat. It's specifically an organization. It's called Aha Punanaleo. And they, for more than 40 years, have been working on recovering, reviving, and making thrive Hawaiian indigenous languages. But for the month of August, every donation that goes to them goes directly to people in Lahaina and meeting their basic needs and recovery needs. So buy some books from Joanna and personally donate for every book that's bought.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
And
And
you to donate directly to them if you
yes,
can.
I feel like too, like everyone go check out that link and just see what good work they're doing there. We did have some great questions, and please, everyone, feel free. Thank you, Grace and Jen, for that super fascinating conversation. I took like a page of notes. So please feel free to keep dropping your questions in the chat, but I'll start with these two from Kaya, who asks, number one, how do you reconcile or not the understanding that trauma affects the body with a medical model that insists pain and illness must have a visible mechanical cause to be considered real or valid?
Oh, I don't reconcile with that at all. Yeah, it makes me very angry. Yeah, there's no redeeming qualities for me to that at all. It's such a source of incredible frustration and honestly of real harm to a lot of people. You know, it's just something that has to change. That's another thing that I'm hoping to do a lot more with this book, is to talk to people who bridge more. I mean, we all know about all different types of healers who are completely outside of Western medicine. We need them very badly. But I'm also really interested in functional medicine people, and integrative medicine people who are trying to actually push our supposed conventional medicine setups to operate under a different paradigm. And that's very hard to do on an individual basis. That takes time. It's like neural change. There might be sparks of change, but it might otherwise just take a long time. And just to be a nerd again, one of my favorite books ever written is by Thomas Kuhn, and it's called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And it's where the word paradigm shift, the phrase paradigm shift, comes from. And we need a paradigm shift. We need a paradigm shift in the way that conventional medicine is done. And usually those shifts come when the crisis is so bad that it's just not working at all. And I think we're pretty much at that point for anything except people with very like acute illness, and things that can be solved with, say surgery, that need surgery, or that, other types of sort of very high tech interventions, which are important.
Thank you for that. And then the follow-up question to it was, what factors or influences have affected the relationship you have with inhabiting a body in pain?
Well, I do think there has been I don't want to say cultural relationship, because I don't believe this is like an essential part of Filipino culture. So I want to say like a learned behavior influence from family, something that I see can be common among some Filipino American families, which is, and maybe this is just a general immigrant thing as well, because I'm second generation, which is the whole, like you just suck it up and you keep on walking, right? So I definitely did that for a while. And other influences, I'll say I'll leave it at another positive influence that has been a more recent influence, which is, I'll say two positive influences. So somatic therapy has helped me have an incredibly healing relationship to my body, because of the process of actually touching into parts of your body, but in a titrated way. And then the disability justice community has been a major influence on understanding my body in a different way and helping me inhabit it in a way that is much more accepting, and that also gives me a lot of language to be able to communicate with other people around what I am experiencing and what my needs are. So that's a great question. Thank you for that.
I love that. I feel like so much of, if we can't communicate with one another, how do we even start to heal? And so I feel like, especially like so much of the reading we've been doing on disability justice is just being able to put things into words and understanding other people's experiences because of that.
Absolutely.
Constance asks, how have you taken care of yourself emotionally when writing into these family and cultural histories of trauma so that they don't overwhelm you? Great question.
Well, having really strong support people is really key, such as you, Constance. I mean, I would do co-writing a lot so that it wasn't actually just me alone. I would do it with other people just on Zoom, and having kind of that, even the presence of a person across cyberspace was helpful for me. It made me feel accompanied. And then, yeah, lots of breaks, lots of water, treats, and breaks and breaks and breaks. And I had an IG live this morning with somebody named Drea Aguilar. She goes by Conscious Mother on Instagram, and she was a spiritual support to me, and I really needed that as well. So yeah, I definitely encourage people who are writing highly personal nonfiction, especially, to take care of yourself while you're doing it, whatever you might need. And those are some of the things that I needed.
Okay, quick question. What's your favorite snack? While writing.
Well, salty. I'm a salty person.
Yeah.
So I'm like a salt and vinegar potato chip person.
Oh, nice. Grace, how about you? Favorite snack while you're writing?
I liked popcorn so much that I can't have popcorn anymore. Like I think I have a problem with popcorn, and so anyways, but I used to love popcorn, but not anymore. I think salt and vinegar. Like my mother gave me salt and vinegar pistachios, which sounds strange, but they're really good. Yes, they have them at the supermarket at Marshall's, I think. Yeah, salt and vinegar pistachios.
Marshall's, I love it. I'm going to look for them.
I know. Now we have to all look for that. Awesome. We had another question from Karen. She says, thanks so much for this conversation, Jen and Grace. A writerly question. How do you keep motivated to write in the face of criticism in this format when some editors said readers wouldn't understand it? How do you block out that noise?
Great question. I'm trying to actually go back in time to remember what exactly I felt. So I actually had an agent tell me very early on in my process that she couldn't imagine a market for my book. And I'm trying to remember what I felt when she said that. And I want to say that I didn't believe her because I just kept writing. So there was that. But then, the other things that can be hard, the motivation part. Motivation. I think that, I'll be honest. I just feel like in a lot of ways, this book was beyond me. Like, I don't know, it kind of like used me or something to get written, because the motivation was very strong the whole way through. Except for, I do remember now one time when I was really, really down in the dumps and wanted to give up. And it was at a time when I didn't have confidence in my own writing because of some feedback that I had been getting, even though it was feedback from a person who was really trying to help me improve my writing, right? So I knew it was coming from a person on my team who was rooting for me. And yet, because of some other things that had happened, like I had just had, a whole feature article essentially be rejected from a magazine, even though I had spent an entire summer on it. So I felt really low. Like I had no confidence that I could do this. And then I guess the way that I rebuilt that confidence was again through support people, really, really necessary key support people that I could process all of those kind of disappointments and those fears and those self-doubts with, and who would really listen, and understand, and then and cheer me on to try again and to keep going, and also give me really concrete ways forward, right? As in like, oh, well, hey, this feedback was about this, but maybe um, this is a piece of advice that was really helpful for me. It came from Meenal Hajratwala, who runs the Unicorn Authors Club. And she said, when people give you criticism or feedback, they might actually be identifying something that could be better, but it doesn't mean that your writing sucks overall. And it also doesn't mean that they have the solution, right? Like you have the solution. And so you just have to keep finding it. Keep trying to find it. Keep writing to find it.
I love that. I love that. And it feels like so much of, for both of your books, having a community around you, and finding the right team essentially to support you through this has been so important. Can Jen and Grace, can you both talk about, I think a little bit more about the process of putting together that team, and how do you know when, like Jen, you said that one agent told you like there's no market for this book. What do you do then?
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I've had big disappointments and rejection and feel like I'm at the very bottom of my motivation, and that, I don't have any encouragement to keep going, I've asked myself, like, do you want to still write? And at those low, low moments, I did. Like, even if no one was going to read it, there was like, I still get enough out of putting a story together for just myself, I guess, that was motivation enough. I mean, I can't, of course I'm more ambitious than that. I want more, but at the core of it, writing is something I choose. And I do ask myself, like, do you still want to do this? And I do. And so then it starts with me, like I'm doing this for myself. And then, hopefully I find people who appreciate and understand what I'm trying to do, and see what I do in the ways that um, you have that, Jen, and they can do some of that other work of shepherding the book through.
Mm. Yeah, I had said something to somebody else who had asked me a similar question around this, about how I think there's something to be said about, like, I love what you said, Grace, about just tapping into the part of you that just wants to write, regardless. I love that. And just like the love and joy of writing, like no matter what. And I think that there's like love, joy, and trust in just kind of like trusting the story that you want to tell. And remembering that it might not be a story for everybody. And so you might just be hearing feedback from people for whom it's not for, but if you just really like love and trust the story you want to write and what you want to express, then it's a win-win situation, because the process will be enjoyable. And, but then also, if you just kind of hold fast to that trust in the story, then, that's the most important thing, is just to remain faithful to writing it. You're the person to write it, and then others can choose how they receive it, but it won't affect the fact that you got to write it.
Wonderful, really powerful. It makes me so excited to know that this book is going out into the world today. And Jen, I know you talked about that you have an in-person event tomorrow at Elliott Bay Books. And I think Grace can speak to this, because I know we've talked about it. As hopefully your book has a very long life, you get to come across people who have read it and, like you said, feel accompanied by your work, and for whom it resonates. And I think that will happen.
Thank you, Joanna.
Absolutely. I know we're getting close to time here. And so if folks have any last questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. But I always like to, and I love it. People are saying like they like the sample that they've read so far from the library, and people are excited to get their copies and start reading. But as I think we're all like devoted book lovers. I always like to ask if you can share a recommendation of a book that was important to you or that you really valued from childhood. And if there's something recent that you have read and really loved, if you want to share that with the group.
Grace, do you have anything off the top of your head? I had to think for a little bit.
Oh, let's see. I was looking through, you had mentioned The Woman Warrior. And so for me, as someone starting to write, that was incredible. Maxine Hutchinson's The Woman Warrior was really important to me early on. And recently, I don't know, I'm listen and read so many books that sometimes it's hard to like grab onto which one. But I'm really excited to read Elizabeth Rush's book. Now I'm forgetting the title, but she has an excerpt of it in the New York Times, like Antarctica. I don't know, it's so good. She interviews the Filipinos who are working on this ship for 20 years. It's a really amazing book by Elizabeth Rush. I'll write it in the chat box.
And I'll say that so I read all of the Anne of Green Gables books when I was little, but it was actually the other series about kind of the darker writer girl, Emily, the Emily books that I really loved. I was like, oh, this one's a misfit. I like her. So those were kind of influential to me as a kid. And most recently, I'm not done with this book yet, but I did start reading somebody's book who's on this call, Beverly Perino's Wildflowers. And damn, oh, sorry, I don't know if I can curse on here. Sorry, children. But I read the first 3 stories. They're fiction, short stories, and I wanted to binge read the whole thing, but I couldn't because I was doing work stuff. But it's just incredibly gripping and powerful. So if y'all haven't checked it out yet, I highly recommend it.
I love that. That's like, to me, the hallmark of a good book. You're like, I want to drop everything and everyone. Go away for 8 hours so I can read this.
Yes.
We had one last question from Maritza. She just wanted to know, did living in Puerto Rico with your partner also influence your insights?
Oh my goodness, Maritza, Professor Stanchich. Yes, absolutely. And I write about it in the book. But there was actually a lot more that I had written about, like a whole other essay about Puerto Rico that unfortunately went onto the cutting room floor, but will maybe end up in some future publication. But absolutely, oh my goodness, Puerto Rico as like a sister island to archipelago to the Philippines, with a similar history of colonization and a similar history of resistance, absolutely influenced me and really actually put me on a sped up path to healing.
I would love to see a follow-up book about Puerto Rico and its ties. That sounds really fascinating. Okay, so I dropped in the chat, so don't forget, Jen is being amazing and going to donate to the cause that she dropped in the chat link for any books that are purchased. So please take advantage of that, and just also take a look at the link for the organization. Can you tell us the name again, Jen?
Yes, I'm going to actually put in the
Do you want to put it in the chat one more time?
Handy. There you go. It's Aha Punanaleo. And again, they focus on preserving Hawaiian languages, but are obviously they're deeply connected with Indigenous Hawaiians around the archipelago. And so they are going to be donating all of their August donations directly to people directly affected by the fires.
Fantastic. Well, again, thank you both so much. I'm so excited when I think Grace told me first, she said, there's this amazing writer you have to meet. She has a new book coming out. And then, Jen, you were able to come to Long Beach for the AAAS conference. So we got to meet in person, and that was such a fun night at Kubo, one of our spaces here in Long Beach. And so we hope that to see both of you back in Long Beach in person again. But until that time, please go out and, wherever you get your indie bookstore, indie books, pick up Jen's book. We do have signed book plates that are going to be shipping out soon with books. And I always forget to do this, but I took off I don't know if you've done this yet, but I took off the book jacket for the book, and it's probably really going to hard to see on Zoom, but it has this tracery and it feels like veins embossed into the undercover. So kudos. Yeah, really fantastic. So kudos to your team on this at HarperCollins, at Amistad, because it really feels like they put so much thought and care into helping to bring this book into the world.
Yes, agreed.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, everyone, again for being with us. Have a wonderful night, and enjoy the rest of this final summer days, I think, wherever you are.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate everybody for coming.
Bye, everyone. Good night.
Bye. Good night.